Understanding the windfall tax in Nigeria. One key principle of windfall taxes is that they are generally socioeconomic balancing acts rather than avenues for revenue mongering. Given this principle, could you expand on how this windfall tax in Nigeria is positioned within this context? Will it achieve the balance it aims for, or does it lean more toward revenue generation?
First of all, let me say that I am in support of a windfall tax, considering the certain situation in the country today which we're facing. The government deficit for this year is the revenue payments from the budget this year for debt service is 8.2 trillion. Our education budget is 2 trillion. Our defense budget is also 2 trillion. Our debt service payment is 4 times our education and defense budget. That is a significant issue in terms of sustainability. Though the government has said it has reduced the debt to revenue by about 30%, the debt profile now at 121 trillion remains a significant challenge to Nigeria. Having said that, also, money supply has increased by 75% year on year, currently starting at 100 trillion. And we have significant issues with inflation. As you know now, the pump prices are likely to go up, and that is definitely a cost push driver for inflation. Considering the fact that inflation slowed in July, we need to measure the impact of the fuel price increases on inflation, because this is a direct impact and it's definitely going to have a cost push effect on inflation. So in terms of trying to abate inflation, the challenge is, are we going to continue to raise interest rates to be able to tame inflation, given the challenges we face? So clearly the government is in a fiscal dilemma, and no thanks to 30 trillion worth of ways and means finances, of which 4.5 trillion has been paid down to date. So, but I think I need to go back to what Teslim in his opening remarks stated. The problem we have is the trust deficit, and the fact that we find that we have a government that has put the cart before the horse in terms of policy implementation. They removed the subsidy, and at the same time, they devalued the currency. So the net gain on that was zero. So we've seen a lot of inconsistencies in policy implementation. The central bank governor and the finance minister were not appointed until September. And before they could settle down and get things going, the Naira had gone into free fall. So it wasn't until early this year that we started to stem that tide. But by then, the damage had already been done with devaluation. And with what we've seen now, NNPC has released its results. We see an insolvent corporation that has finally admitted that it can no longer pay its traders the money to import fuel. So we're in a dilemma if you take a look at it all around. But the key, I go back to Teslim's opening remark, is the trust deficit. And this also reflects itself with the fact that the social intervention program that was supposed to cushion the impact of this economic reforms have failed in a spectacular manner. The minister in charge has been accused of corruption. She's been placed on suspension, but there's been such a long gap that there's nobody driving the social intervention program. And that, of course, has led to the protests, the demonstrations, and the strikes, which shut down the country for 2 days early in August. So, and the optics also is not very good. At the point in time, the president is also buying a new yacht, a new private jet, and also a brand new car. So these things, in terms of the optics, are not just right. So the problem is that trust deficit and the inability of the government to articulate and implement its policy properly, clearly putting the cart before the horse, is why we're all skeptical now about this windfall tax, because some people might claim is that this windfall tax is what the government is using to buy their private jets, build a mansion for the vice president, and all these sorts of things, because that is the way the common man would look at it on the streets. So I think I agree with Teslim's opening remark that while I don't have a problem with the windfall tax, the issue of his acceptance is because of that trust deficit. Thank you very much.
So in looking at establishing a consensus from the different perspectives on the windfall tax to our advantage, can you help us parallel and identify differences in the fundamental understanding of and interpretations around the windfall levies?
Putting some of these funds directly into buying equipment for the teaching hospitals around the country, i.e. diverting these funds into social infrastructure where we can make an impact. I think the other participants have, the other discussants have captured that. And I think really it's how we reinvest this in social infrastructure. I think that is critical, where we can make more of an impact. And of course, some of this money should also go towards the social intervention fund that will cushion the effects. I think I buy that idea significantly. I think trying to keep that money within the banks people would not also not trust that, because people also don't trust Nigerian banks. But I think I agree with the point that we need to isolate those funds and we need to reinvest them in social infrastructure without a doubt. But going forward, I think what is important is that the fundamentals of the Nigerian economy is what we all really need to talk about. Our gross domestic product has been eroded from close to 560 in 2014, closing on 600 billion. We're going to close this year at about 240 billion in terms of our GDP. So by the time you take a look at eroding about $200 to $300 billion of your GDP, that's pretty significant. Nigeria is now the fourth largest economy in Africa, and the challenges are significant. We all remember that in 2008, 2009, despite the fact that we had a global financial crisis, Nigeria had in excess of $20 billion in excess crude accounts. Two governors came up, notably Fashola and Amici, and said that that money had to be shared to the states, and they went to court. And the idea then was to turn the excess crude into the sovereign wealth fund. Now you have a sovereign wealth fund that has what you call a stabilization fund, but that stabilization fund is less than $100 million, which cannot impact the current situation of fiscal challenges we have in Nigeria. On the other hand, Norway's sovereign wealth fund is about $1.2 trillion and declared a profit of over $230 billion just last year. So the fact is that we have not put in a mechanism in place to be able to adjust for fiscal deficit. Who will think that we'll be suffering in Nigeria when oil is at $80 a barrel? Normally, the problems of Nigeria is when oil prices drop to maybe $40 a barrel or $30 a barrel. Oil production has gone down to 1.3 trillion. Government does not have revenues. Now they're taxing non-oil revenues. Oil production is at 1.3 trillion barrels. In 1977, oil production was 2.5 million barrels a day. Today, we have no business where the oil should not be at least 3.5 million barrels a day. So investment in the oil sector in 2019 was $22 billion. Today is less than $2 billion. And we've all seen the balance sheet of the NNPC, 264 trillion in assets, 30 billion barrels of oil in reserves, and 200 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves, and we cannot exploit it to the benefit of Nigeria. So those challenges, structural challenges, remain. And I think, coupled with the fact that this government has not got their reform project on track, we're going to continue to experience significant challenges within the next 18 months in this country.
So far, I can understand windfall taxes levy being collected from profits made due to act of God, even after abiding all the code of conduct and policies. What I want to know now is, will the government compensate if the same conditions makes a firm incur losses?
So the question was raised that if you take a look at the banks, I think let's take a look at the scenario with the banks. The banks are growing at 28%. There was an analysis we did recently on the year end, and the banks are growing at 28% per GDP growth. The oil and gas, which grew 10% after coming back, and all the other key sectors, value added, agriculture, manufacturing, telecoms, are achieving very anemic growth, under 5%. In fact, manufacturing 1.8%, and all the other sectors are growing in a very weak area. So the question is that we need to, it's not so much about compensation, but creating a stable macroeconomic environment. When you create a stable macroeconomic environment, everybody thrives. I.e., there was a time in Nigeria where this economy was growing between 8.5 to 12, 13%. If you take a look at 2011, 2013, 14, inflation was less than about 11%, and MPR was about 12, 13%. At that point in time, the Nigerian economy grew by 8 to 12, 14%. Nobody was talking about a windfall tax at that point in time because everybody was thriving, the banks were doing well, and everybody is doing well. It is when you have distortions in an economy that people complain. So when you have this distortion in an economy and the banks are growing at 28% GDP, they're declaring bumper profits, and everybody else is suffering, then what do? It is important that the manufacturing sectors should be given tax breaks. Because if you do not give them tax breaks and you are increasing VAT at a time when you are in stagflation and the economy is not growing and purchasing power is low, Nigeria has become a sachet economy. Even alcohol is sold in sachets. So that tells you that your purchasing power has been depleted significantly. 133 million people in multidimensional poverty. Meanwhile, you are putting in a consumption tax. The consumption tax is going to affect consumption. It's going to affect consumers because those sachet prices are going to go up. That is not the way to restore economic growth or confidence. So the most important thing from my own perspective is that you must create a stable macroeconomic environment where you are growing Nigeria's economy by at least 8% to like 12 or 15%. When our economy is growing between 8 and 15% on a consistent basis, nobody will be talking about tax. Even if you increase the tax at that point in time, there's significant purchasing power to compensate. And the banks will not be complaining. So it is a situation where you have a distortion whereby the banks are making money, but everybody else is not. So you become a target. So amidst when people are not doing well and there's only one person doing well, that person will bear the burden. But again, the people who are not doing well, you look at your sector, you identify what you need to do. We talk about this fund being reinvested into social infrastructure, looking at the social intervention fund, looking at creating things with the hospitals, creating things with education. So the key really, as far as I see it, is that we must 2014 as we did in 2011. That will be the solution to the problem.
All the guest position on the windfall tax administration has been raised, but what is the role the people can play here, the households, the Nigerians, to ensure that they can navigate this? The person says proper administration, but I think navigating this period.
People, we always talk about the people, but one of the challenges in Nigeria is that we, the people, tend to be very passive. People just tend to take things at face value, and that is why, unfortunately, the democracy does not work. In any other situation, most people would have been writing to their congressmen, their parliamentarians, their House of Reps, their senators, protesting and making their positions known. Where are the lobby groups that are representing people's interests? That is where the democracy fails in Nigeria. Because in other climes, when people see these sort of things and they know a new law is going to be passed, they start to put pressure on the legislators. And the legislators are concerned about their re-elections. That if we pass this thing, I might not be re-elected. So when the thing becomes an election issue and the fact that people are watching you, it's only in this country, you don't know the voting patterns of your senators or the voting patterns of your House of Representatives because it doesn't matter. So we, the people, are still very disorganized. We're very passive, and people have not been able to mobilize their positions into lobby. Where are the lobby groups that are looking at this? Yes, the corporates are more organized. Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, NASIMA, the Chamber of Commerce, the National Economic Summit groups, the industry groups within MAN and NASIMA. It is these organizations that we do not have. So these organizations, where are their positions? They should be coming out, with counter proposals to a lot of all these things, that this is hurting us. This is where we need to be. You will see these organizations have their own economists who would come out to advocate their positions in a very active manner. But the people are, with 133 million Nigerians in multidimensional poverty, most people are trying to they're living on a day-to-day basis. They do not have any, their mission in life is survival. So all these issues you're talking about are irrelevant to them. They're looking at the next sachet of sugar they're going to buy, or even Gary now being sold in sachets. Transportation costs are going to go up pretty soon. So people are basically dealing with survival issues, that a lot of all these issues, government normally has a free hand just to push them through, and before you know what's happening, the legislation has been passed through, and that's the way it is. So this is really where we have a challenge, because, and that is why forums like this, which we're having, we need to be able to have this sort of forum, record it as ProShare does, and let the relevant people in government harmonize our findings and let them know that this is what people are saying. We need to constantly and continue put the pressure back onto government through these sorts of intervention to understand that, these things have deep impact on the population and on the people. And increasing VAT to 10% with 133 million people in multidimensional poverty, suffering in a sachet economy, and imposing a consumption tax on them with additional fuel price increases is a recipe for social unrest.
And I'd like to get to our esteemed panelists to give their closing thoughts, each in 2 minutes, so that we'll wrap up this very interesting conversation. I will begin with Dr. Tilewa Adebajo.
First of all, again, let me say thank you to ProShare for inviting me to this economist conference. Highly honored. My wrap-up is going to be very short because I think I've said it. My overriding concern is that we need to restore an enabling environment in the Nigerian economy. We need to bring down inflation to 11%, and we begin to see consistent growth between 8 to 10% on a sustainable basis in Nigeria. That is the only way everybody is going to thrive in Nigeria. The government policy, as I've said, has been, the reform policy of this government has stalled. In fact, my latest report says that this economy is now, the reforms are suffering fatigue, and we're in a state of economic quagmire. The government has put the cart before the horse, and it's time they press the reset button to ensure that we get back on the point of stability. And I think, as Teslim has told us in the beginning, the trust deficits, I think, is a singular problem for this government. So very quickly, that's my own summation. Thank you very much.